Hello friends, and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to do a fun video that I've seen going around BookTube. I feel like I've seen 2 or 3, maybe 4 creators that I follow make videos about book trends we should leave in 2024. And I have a lot of opinions, as you might know if you've watched my videos, especially when it comes to books and publishing and authors and fellow readers and the book community at large and tropes. So I thought that this would be really fun, and I asked my patrons and my Instagram followers and all of you on my community tab to let me know what you wanted to leave behind in 2024 in any realm to do with books. And I'm gonna go through as many of them as I can before I get tired and need a cup of tea. And I'm gonna weigh in, see if I agree with you, disagree, maybe rant a little bit if I do agree. And I think it'll be kind of interesting to see how aligned we are as a community, what we're all kind of collectively over and done with. And I did have a lot of responses, so I imagine I won't get through everything. So if you're enjoying this and you want me to make a part 2, let me know in the comments. And also, if any of these individual ideas are interesting enough to you that you would want a whole video kind of getting deeper into the weeds, let me know that as well, because I did take a quick look at some of the comments and a lot of them are things that I have considered making entire videos on, so let me know. Okay, I'm gonna start with my patrons over on Discord. So I just asked in our book channel. Okay, so the first 2 comments have to do with books being recommended solely by being popular on BookTok. So the idea of stores having a BookTok section or people promoting a book as being a BookTok sensation, and that's it. That's the entirety of the marketing strategy, is to say that it's popular on BookTok, or, you know, algorithms and bookstores and so on really pushing BookTok favorites on everyone, kind of regardless of what they have selected as their interests or what their previous reading habits might be. And, you know, I understand why this is happening, and I think it makes sense that bookstores and publishers and authors are kind of leaning into this because BookTok is so popular and it is getting so many people reading who were not regular readers before, and it is driving sales and making books bestsellers. This is really dependent because there are so many different pockets of BookTok, and different areas of BookTok have different preferences and are talking about different types of books. And I've definitely picked up books that I've seen on BookTok and loved them. But I have also found that there are certain books, especially in the romantasy and romance genres, that get really popular on BookTok that are very much not my taste. So I do kind of struggle with this sometimes, where a book is constantly being pushed in my face everywhere because it is big on BookTok, but with no other information, which leaves me kind of feeling very at sea in terms of whether I'm actually gonna like the book or not, because it being popular on BookTok doesn't tell me anything. You know, about whether I will actually like it or not, because it's so vague. There are millions of people on BookTok and they all have their own preferences, but there is a particular trend of what tends to really blow up on BookTok, and those books typically are not my cup of tea, but I never know if the book that's being promoted is actually a diamond in the rough, or if it's, you know, yet another paint by trope romantasy that is going to make me feel the rage of all the fires of hell when I read it, especially when the marketing doesn't say literally anything else about the book. So agreed. I would love marketing, advertising to actually share a little bit more information about the books, and not just a list of tropes either. I feel like that's going to come up somewhere in the comments. I want real blurbs back, and not blurbs that tell you every single story beat either, or reveal some big twist. Just, you know, a nice little blurb that gives you an idea of the setting and the premise and, you know, the inciting incident and who our main character might be, and give us a vibe without telling us literally everything about the story or literally nothing. There has to be some sort of a happy medium. Okay, adding millions of tropes into one book instead of picking a few and fleshing them out is a big one for me. Like, don't call it or advertise it as fake dating if the scene is 2 pages long. Yeah, this is definitely irritating, especially when the tropes picked are tropes that I don't like. But in general, the idea that a book has to have as many tropes as possible, it's enemies to lovers, and it's fake dating, and it's one bed, and it's fated mates, and it's on and on and on and on and on with every possible trope, it just starts starts to feel so paint by numbers, so familiar, but not in a comforting way, in a why am I reading the same book recycled 500 times in 500 ways kind of way. I agree, focusing on a few tropes, if you really want to include a particular trope because you, the author, enjoy that trope, or because it's really popular and you want to give the readers what they want, like, sure, go for it. Even a couple tropes, Sometimes I think we as readers can also get a little too hung up on listing every possible trope, and sometimes it is the readers who are doing it, who are saying that a book has all these tropes and they're just listing everything it could possibly be connected to, even if it is a, fake dating scene that lasts 2 pages and isn't really, vital to the plot or the story in general. Focusing on quality over quantity in general in life is a good way to live. And I think it also applies to books and authors, and maybe focusing on a few tropes and really making them feel important for the story and deeply entrenched in the story that's happening, and make sure they make sense and that they deepen the character development, or they tie in with the world building, or they're, done in some sort of a unique or clever way, instead of it just being, again, feeling like it's a paint by numbers. Put as many tropes in there as possible so it can be marketed that way, and so that if someone happens to like any of the 25 tropes in this book, they might pick it up. That just feels like trying to write something so general to appeal to as many people as possible that it can't live up to its full potential as a single story with a single plot. So yeah, agreed. Misleading covers is annoying for me. The only one I can think of on the spot is the US cover version of Lessons in Chemistry. I'll put it here in editing, which makes the book look like some sort of rom-com. The only reason I ended up reading it was when you, as in I, talked about it in one of my videos, but I, as in the commenter, don't think the US cover does it justice, not like the UK cover, which I'll put here. I'm sure there are other examples of this too. Yeah, this is an interesting one. I definitely find it fascinating, the different ways that books are designed for different markets. I imagine that there's a lot of market research that goes into different book designs for different markets, different countries, but I do often have a preference for a book cover that is not available in Canada, and that always drives me absolutely up the wall, because if I'm going to buy a physical copy of a book, I want the book cover that, if I haven't read the book yet, is the most beautiful to me or most aesthetically pleasing. And if I have read the book, I want the cover that I feel best represents the book. And it really annoys me when I have to search high and low to find the UK cover, for example, and get it in Canada, which is silly because we're part of the Commonwealth. It shouldn't be so hard. But anyway, so yes, I think this is interesting. I don't know if I would agree necessarily with this specific example. I don't know that I find the US cover to be rom-com-y or that it misrepresents the book necessarily. I do agree that the UK cover is superior. I like it better. And maybe it is, I guess, more representative of what the book is, but it still is not necessarily as representative as it could be, especially in terms of the tone. The book is pretty heavy, and all the book covers I've seen for Lessons in Chemistry are very bright and fun and poppy looking, where they could almost be something, comedic or very lighthearted, and I would not categorize the book that way. So, but I see what you mean, and I think this is interesting. This is something I could definitely see myself diving into much more deeply in a whole video, comparing covers for maybe like my favorite books, for example, in different markets, and picking which one I think is most representative of the book and kind of talking about it, or talking about how I would design a new cover if none of them really work for me, or ways that they could be combined in a fun way. Let me know if you'd want a video series like that. It could be fun. And let me know your thoughts on this one, because I feel like I don't have a strong opinion necessarily. I'm sort of mixed on it in terms of a cover being misleading, although I do think I saw comments talking about cartoon romance covers being misleading. So if we get around to that, we can talk about that, because I maybe have slightly more opinions on that specifically. Had multiple in one comment. So the first part is drawing out storylines or universes to get more books. I'm all about detail, but sometimes enough is enough. And yes, I agree. I would say that I usually think that this falls more on publishers than authors. I'm sure there are times that authors try to stretch their story out to more books, hoping that they'll have more success or make more money or whatever. But I do think often it's on the publisher's end, where someone comes to them with a story maybe as a standalone, and the publisher is like, this is great, let's make it a duology or a trilogy. Or someone comes in saying, okay, I have this idea, it might be a bit too much for a single book, so maybe a duology. And again, the publisher pushes for 3 or 4 books. And I think it even happens sometimes where someone puts out a book and it ends up being more popular than they maybe initially expected, both the author and the publisher, and then one or both decide to capitalize on the popularity and continue on in a series. And I think there's a way that that can be done well, you know, especially if an author has a lot more ideas and more characters that could be expanded upon, and the world is extensive enough. You know, I'm thinking about something like fantasy, because I feel like this happens in fantasy more than most other genres that I have a lot of personal experience with. It can be done well, I think. You know, I think about someone like Samantha Shannon, who I think when she wrote Priory, it was meant to be a standalone, and then it was popular, people loved it, and she had so much more work done in the world building and the characters and the lore and everything that she decided to write a prequel. And then that did so well that she's considering writing more. But I think she's doing it in such a way that she's doing it with integrity, it feels like. It feels like she still has things to say. She has a story to tell. She is still totally invested in creating, you know, brand new characters in this world and fleshing them out completely and doing them justice. And the world is so huge and so detailed that it can sustain many more books exploring different parts of it. But there are definitely examples that I can think of that I'm not going to name because I'm not trying to bash anybody, but you know, there are examples I can think of where authors and or publishers have decided to capitalize on a series popularity and just continuing to churn out books even though they're really not adding anything, and it's just, you know, spinning your wheels with no real purpose. So yeah, I agree with this. I think more in a series that is incredible and the author's really committed to doing it justice can be great, but it's very easy to feel like it's just filler and trying to milk that cash cow for as long as humanly possible. They also had more in their comment though. They brought up so many different editions of books being made and released on the same day. And then you have to buy this version of the book to get this additional content and that version to get that other content. Seems like a money grab. Yes, so much this. I think that, again, publishing is a business. I get it. Publishers have to make money. Authors should be making money for their creativity and their time. Everyone involved in the process has to make money. But it does feel like we're being scammed as readers sometimes, especially when there are exclusive chapters or something. I don't think this has ever happened with any book that I was invested in reading, so thank goodness for that. But I've seen people talking about this happening, and I just find it wild and also kind of unethical. I feel like if you're selling a book, especially with how much books cost these days, especially if you're buying a hardcover soon after release and it's some sort of special edition with sprayed edges or whatever. In Canada anyway, books like that are easily over $40, if not more. And if I'm buying a book at that price, I better be getting the entire book. You know, if there is an extra chapter that I have to buy a whole other version of the book to read, I'm just not going to read the book at all because it's ridiculous. It feels so disrespectful to readers and it's just a cheap money grab. And I said what I said. I don't regret it. I just think it's so gross. And it also just feels incredibly exclusionary because books are so expensive already. The idea that you have to buy a physical copy, which can be exorbitant and out of people's budgets in general, like a single physical copy could be out of someone's budget. So now if they read it digitally, like get an ebook from their library or something, they're not getting the bonus content. But also if they can't afford to buy 6 different exclusive versions, each with their own bonus chapter, they're missing out on all this extra content because they're not wealthy or financially irresponsible. That feels very wrong to me. Obviously, again, it's a business. I get it, but I don't think this is cool. I don't think there should be exclusive content gate kept by multiple versions. It's one thing if a book has been out for 10 years and there's a special edition that comes out and there's a bonus epilogue chapter or something, or an author decides to go back in and do a slightly updated version or something. That's one thing, but yeah, on release day, multiple versions that are breadcrumbing out the content of the book instead of just giving you the book you bought for, not cool, very not cool, and should definitely be left behind in 2024 in this economy and just in general. No, thank you. Okay, next up, this is kind of minor, but I love a bit of diversity in covers too. For example, all the rom-coms have the same illustration style and layout, and I think Romantasy has the same problem. Yes, I agree. I love judging a book by its cover, okay? I love art, I love graphic design, I love a beautiful book cover, and it feels lazy, honestly, to just have a template within a genre and just repeat it over and over and over and over again with no innovation. I get that there is a certain amount of telegraphing of what kind of book it is and who the target audience is and what the genre is through the book cover. And that is something that's being done with these, you know, quirky cartoon adult romance covers or romantasy covers that have, you know, swirling filigree and the same sort of text. And it's all House of blank and blank. I get that that is a shorthand so that the target audience can find the books they're looking for faster and immediately recognize that it's a book that they might like because it is reminiscent of a book they've already read. But it's boring. It's not creative. It's not exciting. And I love when books try something different and try to be unique, and especially when they try to actually represent what the book is about instead of just trying to, again, sort of feels like the trope thing again. Instead of trying to write a book that is just fitting as many tropes as possible or designing a cover to just be as close to the trend of covers in this subgenre as possible, doing something unique, doing something with passion that is intentional and everything is tied together, and maybe even some fun little like Easter eggs or something in the cover, or something that hints at something that you won't understand until you've read the book. Like, just do something new and different. I have a whole video on this, so I'm not going to dive into it too deeply, but someone said, this is something you touched on in your Spice and YA video, Elizabeth. But one thing that's beginning to annoy me is the blurring lines between YA and adult. I think it's often a marketing thing where they just try to appeal to the widest audience as possible, but I've picked up a few books recently where I thought I was getting an adult book, but the tone has come across kind of juvenile. Yeah, I definitely talked about this a bit in my Spice and YA video. I'll link it if you missed it in the cards and in the description box. But it's interesting because this comment is kind of coming at it from the opposite side, because the book I used as an example in that video is YA, or is being marketed as YA, has been promoted as YA, despite the author saying, someone let me know in the comments that the author wanted the book to be adult, and then their publisher basically forced them to make it YA. But this comment is saying sort of the opposite, where they pick up an adult book and it's marketed as adult, but then the tone or the writing style feels very YA. And it does feel like those lines are blurring, and I totally agree. And I think the hard thing here is that the YA writing style has become its own separate writing style that isn't necessarily specifically about it being a book for teens with teen protagonists. It's just a particular writing style that is sort of expanding into all age demographics of especially speculative fiction. And I'm not personally a huge fan of the sort of typical YA writing style, and I said this in my Spice video too. I really want there to be some sort of other term for this writing style than it feeling YA, because it's not even necessarily that it feels juvenile or feels like it's for teens, although it does feel like that to me because that writing style is so associated in my brain with books for teens. But it's not even so much that, it's just its own style, and it focuses on certain areas more and other areas less, and it's just often a more colloquial or casual tone, and often has more contemporary language, or is not as heavy in descriptions or the intricacies of the world building. It's a lot more action heavy usually, and or romance heavy. And that's fine. That's not necessarily my preference, but it doesn't have to necessarily be tied to YA. I do wish that there was a term for this that was not tied to age demographic, and that books were marketed with that clearly somewhere on it, that that's the kind of book it is, so that those of us who are not a fan can easily avoid those books, and people who are fans can find those books more easily. You would think that that would be what marketing is trying to do, have their books find their audience, and it's easier to do that if we know going into it, if the writing style is going to be our cup of tea. And tying that writing style to an age demographic gets really muddy when people outside of that age demographic start wanting that writing style, again, outside of YA. How do you market it at that point to clearly communicate what kind of book it is, what the writing style is like, while accurately portraying the age demographic of the book, which is something I struggled with my example in my Spice video, because I think that book did have a YA writing style, so I can understand why they might feel they have to market it that way for it to find its audience. But the content, for me personally, felt too mature for teens, and so it feels it should be adult. But then at that point, are people going to feel like it's being mismarketed because the writing style is YA? It's too muddy. I don't think it should be tied to age demographic is what I'm saying. So we need a new term. Feel free to brainstorm in the comments. Tell me what term you think we should use for this writing style, because I do think it needs to be more clearly marked, and again, not be tied to age demographic, because there's too many other factors at play when it comes to what age a book should be marketed to, you know? Most of the other comments here on Discord are sort of riffing on other people's comments or responding to each other, but they're all kind of on the same topics. So I'm gonna move over to, am I gonna go to Instagram or YouTube? Maybe I'll pull both of them up and I'll kind of go back and forth. To try to be fair to everyone. Okay, the first one is the massive hyperconsumerism being encouraged by the publishing industry. I saw a post about Stephanie Garber's new release where they're pushing out 4 special edition covers to be given at random and encouraging people to collect them all. Why would you need 4 editions of a book that has just come out? Yeah, wow. I did not see that but that is wild. And you know, in some ways, I'm glad that at least from this, it doesn't seem like these had exclusive content or something where you're only getting part of the story if you don't collect them all, which I appreciate, but that makes it even more pointless. If the different editions just have different cover art, there is no reason why you need them all. Now, again, like they point out in their comment, the book has just come out, you haven't read it yet, so you don't know if you're gonna love it. It's one thing if you love a book and you start a bit of a collection for that book where you buy multiple editions of your favorites. That's fine. A lot of people do that, and you know, feel free, live your life, but it does feel super odd to encourage that kind of behavior for a new book that you haven't read yet. You don't even know if you're gonna like it and want to keep a single edition, let alone 4 different editions on your bookshelf. And again, it just feels like the commenter pointed out, super, you know, encouraging of hyperconsumerism. And again, sort of really excluding people who can't afford to do that. Again, I get it, they're a business. They don't have to include everyone. They don't have to price their books at $1 to make it more inclusive for everyone, but it just feels scummy. I don't know. I don't like it. And, you know, if they're really excited about 4 different cover designs, then sure, release 4 different cover designs, but tying the marketing specifically to collect them all and encouraging people to buy all 4 rather than maybe just giving people options of different versions to get the one they like best is, I think, where the biggest issue lies here. And it does feel like a huge waste and encouragement of overconsumption. Okay, now I'm going to Instagram. Let's see the first one. Explicit sex scenes in books marketed for teenagers. Yes, I agree. With the caveat that I do think, well, okay, actually no, I totally agree. I don't think any books marketed to teenagers need to have explicit sex scenes. I do think that books marketed to teenagers, older teenagers, can have sex scenes. I personally think it makes more sense for them to be fade to black or not as explicit if they do describe more of what's happening, but be age appropriate and talking about important things to do with getting into sexual activity for the first time or being new to sexual activity, things like consent and safety and comfort and respect and boundaries and all that stuff, which I talked about in my Spice in YA video. But generally, I do agree. I think that far too many books aimed at teenagers have questionable sexual content. I'll leave it at that. I go into way more detail in that video. Not everyone agrees. I get it. So I'm not going to go way into it again. But yeah, some of it's weird vibes, for sure. Okay, let's see. On YouTube, the next most voted comment was normalize not having a romance subplot in every genre fiction novel. Let me figure out who killed the reclusive billionaire without the lead character getting distracted by some milquetoast dude. Unravel the secrets of your ancestors' magic without Steve tagging along drooling all over you. Just, ugh, that is so funny. Oh my God. Yes, I agree. You know, I do love, and I must admit, I am one of those red flag readers or toxic readers who always ships characters in the books I'm reading because I am a bit of a romantic, and if I feel like characters have great chemistry, I'm probably going to ship them together. Sometimes I ship them together in a platonic way as well, but often it is a romantic way because, again, I'm a hopeless romantic. But I don't always need the book to actually do anything with it. You know, not every book has to have a romance. I think it makes sense that a lot of books do because I think we as humans are very reliant on human connection, and whether that human connection is platonic or romantic, I do think developing deep connections with each other and having those relationships is sort of a fundamental piece of humanity, of being a human. And so it makes sense for stories to include those deep connections. I do think sometimes authors focus more on the romance than they do on platonic relationships, and it would be nice to maybe balance it out a little bit more. But I also think it's not unrealistic necessarily that if you're on some sort of life or death long journey that's harrowing, you don't know if you're going to survive, that you might end up hooking up with someone that you're, you know, on this journey with, not only because you're only with each other every single day, and people have needs, you know, or because proximity can breed contempt, but it can also breed love and affection. And people get crushes on people they work with or go to school with or spend a lot of time with all the time. So not necessarily unrealistic, but I do find this comment really funny. And I agree, not every novel needs a romantic subplot. I would even argue the opposite in some ways. I think not every novel needs a lust subplot, and more novels need actual romantic subplots. I want more books where we're focused on like the quiet, early crushing stage, that's like the best part with the butterflies and the tension and the awkwardness, or romance in sort of more of a long-term way where you have older characters who have been together for a long time. Again, Samantha Shannon is so good at this in A Day of Fallen Night. Tunava and her wife, they've been married for a really long time and they still have that love and that passion, but it's a more mature love. It's a more enduring love, and we get to see all the multifaceted parts of what love can turn into when you let it flourish and grow and bloom over decades. I want more of that in the books I'm reading. Like, at least give us different stages of the romance. It doesn't always have to be, again, like often with the trope of enemies to lovers, where you despise each other and then all of a sudden you rip each other's clothes off and you go at it like bunnies for the whole third act of the book. And there's no early stage crushing cuteness, and there's also no long-term development of true deep love. Yeah, so in some ways I agree, and in some ways I almost disagree. In some ways I think too many books have not enough romance and too much lust. And lust is fine, not sex shaming. Sex is great, you know? Lust is totally fine and great and normal, but romance is also great. Again, I'm a hopeless romantic. Is that clear? I feel like that's coming across strong in this video. Okay, people asking if books have spice in it, specifically if it's YA. I was gonna disagree until I got to the caveat. Specifically if it's YA, I mean, actually no, I still don't agree actually, because I think it's fair. I think it's fine for people to have preferences if they want to read spice or not. You know, in general, everyone is allowed to have their preferences of whether they want to read that content or not, especially when you get to thinking about things more inclusively and considering people like maybe a sex-repulsed asexual person who is really trying to enjoy their time reading and not have to read explicit sex scenes. I think it's totally fair for people to want to try to find out that information ahead of time. And when it comes to YA, I think it makes even more sense, because whether it's coming from a parent who is trying to sort of be an aware parent and an involved parent and know what their kid is getting into so that they can have conversations with their kid about what they're reading and make sure that they understand it and they feel comfortable and they know what's realistic and what isn't and what's safe and what isn't. But also, you know, the kids themselves, when you're 12, 13, 14, 15, reading YA, different kids develop at different rates and you might not be ready to read some content. So I think it's totally fair to want to know if there is any sexual content, but also how explicit it is. And that's why I love things like romance.io that has such a huge database of books and has their sort of standard rating system for spice so that you can kind of determine what you're getting as you go into a book, not only to sort of set your expectations and find the books you want, but just, yeah, for inclusivity and for meeting kids and teens where they're at developmentally so that they can read stuff that they are ready for and comfortable with. So I actually disagree with this one, but thank you for bringing it up because I think it's interesting. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Honestly, about all of these, because I'm sure lots of you agree with some of what I'm saying and disagree with others. So I would love to hear your responses to all of these as well. I just noticed that the next one on Instagram is too many damn special editions, which makes me laugh, but also, yes, and we already talked about that. Sort of. But yes, definitely too many special editions, unless it's like the 10-year anniversary again. Let's normalize using the public library instead of buying every single book before we even read it. Yes. Yes, I agree with this. I also wish I could do this more. Sometimes I feel like I have to buy books personally as a creator because there is an expectation that I have books to use for content, and it's just not the same always if I just have it as an ebook on my phone or on my e-reader. I do still use my library for easily at least 50% of the books I read because I could not afford to buy every single book I read in a physical copy, and because I like audiobooks, but also because libraries are great and I love supporting my local library and using that resource. But I 100% definitely agree that regular people who do not have weird jobs like I do should definitely use libraries more, especially when you haven't read a book yet and you don't know if you're gonna like it. I will often read a book first from the library in an ebook or audiobook form. And then if I really love it, I will try to find either a pretty edition or I will try to get it on a good deal used somewhere to eventually add to my shelves, because I do love owning all my favorite books, my 5-star books. I love to be able to reread them and annotate them heavily or just look at the spine or the cover on my shelf and feel joy. And I think that's totally fair and fine. But yeah, I think huge book hauls and buying 50 books that you haven't read yet, just cause it can start to get out of hand. And I definitely also do this sometimes. I do buy too many books sometimes. I do sometimes buy books that I don't know enough about ahead of time and then regret it. But my circumstances are a little bit different because this is my job. So, you know, the lines are muddied, but I do realize that I have a certain responsibility, or I, you know, have an impact. Everyone who makes content about their reading online is contributing to a trend, especially with book hauls and things, which is why, you know, I sometimes will show the books I've recently picked up, and often it's a collective haul, like over a couple months, and then I'll show them in a reel or something, just so people kind of know what I've been picking up and what might be coming up next in my content. But I probably will never make a book haul on my YouTube channel. I can't really see it happening. It's just not really something that I value necessarily, and it's not necessarily something I want to reinforce as a trend. And like I've already said in videos this year, I am really trying to read down my physical TBR this year. I have too many books that I haven't read yet, and I don't like it. So I am trying to work on that. And I do think more reliance on libraries would be great, especially because the more you use your local library, the more funding they can get. And we really should be trying to keep our libraries open and running as much as we can, you know? That cooked audiobooks aren't reading argument with lots of eye roll emojis. Yes. Let's leave it behind in 2024. You know, not even just saying that listening to audiobooks isn't reading, because ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. I'm not even, I'll probably make a video about this, honestly, because I love audiobooks and I'm so sick of hearing this. And the arguments make me absolutely rage because they're ridiculous. But even outside of this, even more broadly, I think we need to stop as a community being so judgmental of each other and elitist and gatekeeping and pedantic. It's not conducive to a healthy, happy community. It's fine to have opinions. I'm not saying, you know, we should never say that some books are less well written than others, or people who skip whole pages of books and then say that they read the whole book, that isn't annoying. Because I don't know, I personally find that annoying. But, you know, they can do that, you know, it's fine. But even more broadly than that, I think we just need to be less elitist and pedantic as a community. Book lovers love to gatekeep other book lovers and to try to give out gold stars to only particular types of readers. I see it constantly. There's constant posturing in online communities, especially, you know, the more elitist literary, you know, classics above everything, or you must read incredibly slowly and with intention and savor every single word. Otherwise, you're just rushing through a book and you're reading to get as many books read in a year as possible, and you don't actually care, and you're not a real reader. Like, just all those takes, enough. They're exhausting. I get, you know, not understanding people who, for example, skip every time that there's a scene description or only read dialogue. I also am baffled by that. But I feel like the people who do that are in the minority, and like, let them live. They can do whatever they want. It's a hobby. You know, if someone loves horror movies, but they hate actually watching gore, so they basically just scroll on their phone and listen to the whole movie, they're allowed to consume horror movies like that if they want. But there's something about literature and books in the book community that gets so up in arms and so protective and so gatekeepy and elitist and holier than thou in our opinions. And I mean, I'm sure I have also been guilty of this before and probably will be again. It's fine. I understand that I am a flawed human being, but just we as a community, I think we need to chill a little bit, you know, just a little more chill would be great. That's how I feel. Every single male love interest in female-male relationships being 6'6" and physically perfect in every single way. I'm a straight guy and have yet to see myself reflected in a romance novel. I'm not even asking for a lot, just an average body type here and there. And yes, I agree. This is one of the few comments that I actually responded to because I felt strongly. I said, I'll die on this hill because I will. I've talked about this before, and I probably will make a whole video about this because I am particularly sensitive to this as a tall woman. I'm 5'10". So at least in Canada, that is very tall. I have very infrequently met women taller than me. I've met more men in my life who are taller than me, but still not that many, to be honest. A lot of men are like the same height as me, if not shorter. And so I find it not only sort of incredibly unrealistic that the vast majority of books, again, often looking at fantasy or romantasy or romance, but also most genres, it seems like every man is at least 6 feet tall, but often they're, you know, over 6'5", which maybe if you're from Norway or something, that makes more sense. But not only is it unrealistic and not representative of the population, but it also just continues to reinforce harmful and very gendered stereotypes. Like, men have to be over 6 feet and they have to be huge and built and muscly, or they're another type where they're really lanky, but they still have abs somehow, even though they've never worked out a day in their lives and they only eat burgers. But they're at least, 6'3" in that case, so it's fine because they still have hands bigger than your head or whatever. And then, the women are always, even if they're described as tall, they're never taller than like 5'6". Which is still tall, but not that tall. They always have to be still petite, or even if they have curves in only particular exact spots that, again, reinforce traditional femininity and the objectification of women, even for books aimed at women. And it's always about how tiny they are and how small their waist is or how small they are next to the man. And again, it just reinforces all these ridiculously gendered and unrealistic stereotypes about what men and women should look like, but also reinforces, in my opinion, harmful stereotypes about what men and women's values are to each other and to society and what we should be and what we're good for. The idea that women have to be beautiful and should be slender in the right spots and curvy in other spots. They should be light enough to easily lift and toss around. They should be dainty and feminine and fragile and in need of protection and at any man's whim. They are an object to be possessed and carried and protected and objectified. And then men have to be these hulking beasts. They have to be possessive and protective and brawny, and they have to be huge, and they have to be dominant and domineering and have a very particular type of personality. And it's just, I don't think it does any of us a great service to reinforce these stereotypes over and over and over again like this. And not only do I not think it's super healthy or useful, especially for younger people that are constantly reading these tropes over and over again, it's also just boring, okay? It's boring. I want so many more types of body types and so many more different height combinations, and men who are average height, women who are average height, but also really tall women and really short men and everywhere in between. I want really skinny men and big men who aren't just all muscles, and the same with women. I want a main character who doesn't have the most unusual eye and hair color to have ever been seen, and a male main character who isn't just 12 abs in a trench coat, We deserve more. We deserve more creativity. We deserve better representation. It's more interesting. Let me know if you agree. I will probably cut some of that out because I just talked for so long. And like I said, I probably am just going to make a whole video on this, but let me know your thoughts in the comments, because I could go on and on and on and on and on and on about this. Okay, but I have been talking for an hour now, so I think I might start to wrap it up. Maybe I'll do one more from each of Instagram and YouTube, and then I'm still gonna have so many that I didn't get around to, so you'll have to let me know if you want me to do a part 2, but let's see. Okay, the next one is skipping paragraphs, to each their own, of course, but it's almost a trend and goes against literature of any kind. I'm not shaming people who skip paragraphs. I've done it before too. I just don't like where it's going. That's so funny since I already brought that up as an example. I agree and I don't agree. On the one hand, I don't get skipping paragraphs. I find it kind of baffling. If I have gotten to the point where I'm reading a book and I am skipping paragraphs, then I'm just going to DNF it, because at that point, why am I even reading this book? Like, if it's not engaging enough for me to want to read the entirety of the book, then I'm not going to read the book. So I don't really understand that. Maybe I'm just a completionist, but to me that would be like watching a TV series, but just randomly skipping an episode on purpose and not worrying that you missed something important. It's different if you're rereading a book and you don't care for a particular scene, so you skip over it, or you remember it really clearly because you already know what happens. But if you don't know what happens, how do you know what you're missing? That's what confuses me. But again, like I said earlier, I think people are allowed to skip things if they want. If someone wants to watch all of Lost and they want to skip every odd numbered episode for some reason, I don't get it, but can they do it? Sure. Do I think that that's leading to some sort of world-ending repercussions that are going to destroy humanity as we know it? Not really. I don't get it, but that's fine. People can do whatever they want in their free time. So, I agree, but I don't agree. I agree that I find it confusing and I don't understand why people are doing it, but I don't agree that it's, leading somewhere bad necessarily. I mean, let me know in the comments if you see another angle on this that I'm not considering, because for me, I just think, if someone wants to spend their time reading books, but not actually reading the whole book and just skipping over huge swaths of text and then continuing to read, which I would imagine would be confusing, but I don't know. It seems like they're getting something out of it. And that's how they want to spend their time. Then I guess they can spend their time that way. Who am I to tell them what to do? I don't think enough people are going to start doing that it would impact publishing as a whole or how books are written. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Again, if you have another take on this, if you see another angle of this, if you're in different pockets of BookTok than I am, and you're seeing examples of this being a really widespread thing, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. But I feel like the examples I've seen of BookTokers who are talking about this, it's always the same, like 2 or 3 BookTokers that are used as examples. So if it's only 2 or 3 people, or maybe a couple more, I don't think that that's an existential threat, but maybe that's just me. I feel like I could do this all day. Why haven't I made a video like this before? It's great. Anyway, we should be able to admit that a lot of popular romance novels are not well written, and that has nothing to do with the plots or being romances. I love to read romance novels and smut and stuff, but I feel like the quality of writing has gone down massively. You can write something that is frivolous and material, but still have a good command of language. I want my smut to be well written. Come on. But it feels impossible to be able to have a conversation about this without being accused of shaming people or something. And to be honest, I'm sure the reason for this is that publishers and authors are having to constantly pump out new books to keep people's attention, and so there is less focus on quality and editing. Edit these books, please, for the love of God. Yes. Oh my God. Okay. Yes. Yes, I agree. I mean, I think if you're here, if you've watched my videos, you know that I don't shy away from critiquing books that I think were poorly written. And I'm never trying to critique an entire genre at a time or say that I think, all smut, all erotica, all romance, all romantasy, all whatever is poorly written, because that's never the case, or it's never what I'm trying to do. Hopefully it doesn't come across that way. But I do think that there is value in being critical of what we read, of reading critically, but also of being willing and able to identify what we don't enjoy in a book or what we think is poorly done, to be able to analyze the writing itself and, recognize when something is not the most well put together, the most well written, the most grammatically correct, or the most varied in its vocabulary, or the way it's using semicolons and commas and ellipses is not conducive to a pleasant reading experience. I think all of that has value, and obviously I practice what I preach, and I am very critical when I read, and I do talk about my feelings on writing styles and specifically how an author has written a book. I've had this experience where people have reacted pretty negatively to my critiques and have felt like I am attacking a whole genre. Or, for example, when I say that a popular book was not well written, in my opinion, that I get a lot of responses where people feel like I am saying that anyone who liked that book, of which there are often many if I'm talking about a popular book, are either stupid, or they don't read critically enough, or their standards are too low, or whatever. And I find that interesting because honestly, I don't feel that way about it. There are books that I love that are just objectively not that great. They weren't written very well, but I still love them, and that's fine. Not everyone is reading for the same reason, and you can read a book that isn't amazingly written and still enjoy the book. They're not necessarily that interdependent. I do think, for me personally, if a book is not well written, that will really impact my enjoyment of it because it's something I'm very aware of and I focus on a lot, but it's not necessarily always the case. Also, different people are going to have different opinions on what makes a book well written. There is no true objective measure of what good writing is. There are so many different writing styles. Writing styles from different countries and different cultures have very different structures and have different styles that might not appeal to everyone. Punctuation or lack thereof can be a style thing. It can be a genre thing. It can just be a preference thing. There are objectively poorly constructed sentences from a technical point of view, but sometimes those rules can be broken for stylistic reasons or for emotional reasons or for character reasons. Whether a piece of writing is good or not is not only subjective, but it also is dependent on so many other factors. But I totally agree with this comment in that, it is fine to acknowledge that something is poorly written or that your opinion is that something is poorly written. I think we should do it more. I think it's great. I think criticism coming from a good faith place is helpful and useful and important for, a functioning society and for art and art spaces. I think that the expectation that people who are reading books should only say something if they have something nice to say is not conducive to a thriving literary scene. Now, that being said, do I have a particular opinion about whether popular romance novels are well written or not? Not necessarily, at least not a well-informed one, because I don't read enough popular romance novels to have enough context to say. I will certainly say that I have read many popular romance novels that I thought were poorly written. That has definitely happened to me. But I've also read popular romance novels that maybe weren't the greatest work of literature I've ever read, didn't have the most gorgeous writing I've ever heard, didn't necessarily have the most impeccably structured sentences I've ever laid my eyes on. But they, you know, were fine. The writing was fine. It wasn't bad. They were good. They did what sentences need to do, which is convey information from the page into my brain. So yeah, I'm sure that this is true. I'm sure there are lots of popular romance books that are poorly written, just like there are probably lots that are fine, that are well written, that are great. I do agree with that final point that these books need to be edited more. I do think that's a trend in general that I'm noticing, that books seem to be getting less and less editing, and there are lots of mistakes that just are left to exist, or even things that maybe, you know, are not necessarily mistakes, but they're things that you would think would be caught by an editor or just by someone rereading a work a couple times and be changed out. Things like really overused words, or phrases that are repeated a lot, or just weird, grammatical or punctuation tics that come up way too often. I understand why it might be happening, but I do agree that I'm noticing sort of a general downtrend in the quality of the writing and in the mistakes and the little quirks and things that normally would have been ironed out by an editor and aren't being ironed out anymore. And I do find it annoying as well. So I'm with you on that. I do get annoyed by things like that. But I do think determining whether writing is good or not is always going to be a subjective thing and dependent on all those many factors that we kind of touched on. I could probably make a whole video on this, as you can tell, because I just talked about that for so long, but interesting. Thank you for leaving that comment. And thank you to everyone who left your suggestions and your comments for all these things that we should leave behind in 2024. I think I mostly agreed with many of you, so it seems like we're sharing the same brain length? That's not a thing. We're on the same wavelength. That's what I was gonna say. Like I said, so many more comments on YouTube and Instagram that I did not get around to, like just forever scrolling on both of them. So if you want a part 2, let me know, because this video is already an hour and 20 minutes long. And I'm really gonna have to cut that down. So let me know if you want a part 2. Let me know if you want me to expand on any of these topics in a standalone video, because I clearly have a lot to say. And let me know if you'd be interested in more videos in this style in general, maybe with different topics or maybe more specific topics. Could be interesting. This was fun. I enjoyed myself. I hope you enjoyed it too. If you did, like it and subscribe if you haven't already. Watch some of my other recent videos if you haven't seen them. They're all good. I'm not biased at all. And consider joining us on Patreon if you want. We have a really fun, vibrant Discord community, which is where I asked this question. And, you know, if I do keep making videos like this, I'm always going to prioritize the patron submissions first as a thank you to them for their support. So could be fun. You could come hang out with us. It's a good time. Great people, good vibes. And yeah, I'm gonna get going. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.